In the marketing communications landscape, commercial sponsorships are often viewed as somewhere between invaluable marketing tools and a chairman's whim. Fortunately, this is beginning to change, with sponsorships maturing from mere bit players to playing genuine and major roles in delivering commercial returns and benefits. But how do we know when it's done correctly and efficiently? salesandmedia.com decided to ask some experts and try and find out what really makes sponsorships commercial.
Hi, this is Paul Gardner, and today we're talking to Tim Watsford, who's the General Manager of the Northern Territory Major Events Company. Tim, what does the Northern Territory Major Events Company do?
Paul, the Northern Territory Major Events Company, first and foremost, delivers, attracts and develops major event properties for the Northern Territory. We are a government-owned company with an independent board that essentially was set up the better part of 20 years ago to acquire content to the Northern Territory that brings visitors here and creates experiences for locals as well. So in a roundabout way, we are the governing body for all major events within the Northern Territory.
And do you compete with other Australian states, or do you also compete with Asia, given the proximity?
Absolutely, both, I think is the short answer to that. From a broader domestic market, yes, we compete with the likes of Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Adelaide and WA to try and bring the best content that is on offer. But yes, direct from our proximity to, in particular, Southeast Asia, with Indonesia only being a couple of hours, Singapore 4 hours, we try and attract content from those markets as well. And I think with competing flights at the moment, it's a challenge, but that's definitely on our to-do list going forward.
And given the size of the territory, is it difficult to compete with someone, say, a New South Wales or Victoria, given the fact that they essentially have more money?
Yeah, no, and spot on. I think we are a population of the better part of 250,000 versus millions across the eastern seaboard. So I guess
that's 250,000 for the whole territory.
For the whole territory. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's small, but yes, it's big. It takes 2 hours to fly from basically the Red Centre to the top end. So if you put it in perspective in terms of competing with the likes of Victoria and New South Wales, we have to be nimble, we have to be agile, and we have to attract content that is completely unique and play to your strengths, I guess. So if you look at the major events or the major projects that Victoria has, whether that be the Australian Grand Prix or the Melbourne Cup in the back end of the year, and Vivid for the likes of Sydney, or even Great Barrier Reef for Queensland, they're big attractions that generate a lot of tourism revenue year in, year out. Northern Territory doesn't have that at its disposal, but what we do have is a really rich cultural and artistic scene, in particular from a First Nations perspective that we try and promote, and both to the broader country and also internationally.
I mean, you touched on the Indigenous or First Nations. I mean, you look at something like Alice Springs versus Darwin. They're pretty different places, aren't they? So it must be difficult to find something that's attractive to tourists, but also fulfills your aims and objectives.
Yeah, look, it is. They're vastly different. What we call the Red Centre and the desert, for want of a better word, and we're lucky enough to house Uluru in itself, which is a fantastic piece of both, I guess, landscape, but also Indigenous culture in and around Yulara. So that is a challenge to get people in there other than seeing the rock. I guess my primary objective is to get people to stick around in the territory for a little bit longer if they do come and see the rock. And the likes of Alice Springs is an incredible place. It's the first time I went there a couple of years ago. It's an eye-opener. It's something that I'd never seen before, born and bred in Sydney. So I guess literally you drive 30 minutes, you don't have phone reception, and you're off the grid. So that's something you don't get to experience anywhere. So I think my job in particular is to get people there, and usually that's on the back of an event or a major project, and give them an excuse to stick around and see a bit more of the broader landscape.
How do you measure ROI? I mean, given the fact that it is all over the place, and you may get a number of people to go to Uluru and then come to Darwin straight after. I mean, how do you measure success? Is it based on room nights booked, or how do you do it?
Yeah, first and foremost. So we're doing a big push as the company now, and since I've been in the chair for the last couple of years, to drive much more of a visitor market. The company was set up to effectively service more of a local market, if that makes sense. So do events to make the livability of Darwin and Alice Springs that much better. What we're shifting towards now is exactly your point, where we're trying to drive a market that is attractive for visitors and get them to stay. And how we measure that, you're dead right. So people in bars, restaurants, filling hotel rooms, making sure that we drive an economic impact on the back of our events. And I think further to that is it's to get locals out of home and experience what Darwin and Alice Springs have as well. So that's more of a stimulus perspective, just making sure that the local economy is moving on the back of our events. So I think if I was judged year in, year out, it's definitely, back to your point, it's putting people in hotel rooms and making sure that the bars and restaurants are full.
Tim, you've obviously been in the role for a little while. As you said before, you're a Sydney boy. I mean, and you're clearly it's a rather large leadership role. I mean, what attracted you to the position in the first place?
Mate, really good question. I've done a pretty successful career in the administration of sport from, I guess, all corners, mostly commercial, Australian Rugby Union and most recently the NRL. And the opportunity to come and test myself in an environment that is completely unique and unrelenting, I'll say, Paul, was too attractive to pass up. And I think in part the board has been really supportive of my vision to grow the business to where we are today, and also refine my skills as a contemporary leader. We've really done a significant piece of work over the last 12 months to look at different ways on what makes people tick, first and foremost, and create a culture that I feel is second to none. What we're doing is really empowering and enabling everyone from the receptionist through to the board to make sure that they all know their spot first and foremost, and also they have buy-in to what our company strategy is. So from what attracted me was probably to refine my engagement and leadership skills in an environment that is a hard one to navigate at the best of times.
Sure. So when you look at the weather, there's obviously seasons. I mean, do you try to attract events for the whole year, or are there certain seasons where you want to be more popular than others?
Yeah, it's a bit like all other tourism, I guess, agencies around the country. Everyone's got kind of a four seasons approach. So to give you some context, in Darwin, we're currently sitting in the wet season, which is kind of February, March, and over the Christmas break, which is traditionally our very low season. And historically, people have left Darwin for December, January, and that's also the same for Alice Springs. If I use those two kind of key cities in the territory, it's the opposite. It's incredibly hot. It's over 40 degrees, and it's quite uncomfortable to live there. So, what we're trying to do now is our dry season, which is very comfortable, mid-20s, great time to be in the top end in particular, through the winter months traditionally for the eastern seaboard states, which is May through to kind of September, October, is not a cloud in the sky, guaranteed not to rain, a really great environment to come and visit. I'm sure you can probably appreciate with that comes events, festivals, and everything in between to get tourists here. So what we're trying to do now is, and what's on our scorecard, is to push people into the shoulder period. So at March, April, or kind of October, November, and develop our low seasons, which is the kind of December, January, February periods when it is low. So it's a challenge. We're competing with those agencies, like I said, and if, for example, with a wet season, we're competing with the likes of a summer in Sydney's, which is pretty hard to beat. So that's well and truly on what we want to try and do going forward, is to really develop an annual portfolio of attractions that get people here to experience everything the Territory has.
We're talking to Tim Watsford, who's the General Manager of the Northern Territory Major Events Company. Tim, when I looked at the portfolio of events you offer, it's very broad. You've got fishing on one hand, or $1 million fish.
Yep.
You've got car racing. You've got obviously First Nations, Indigenous work. You've got light shows. You've got rock concerts. I mean, how do you balance that all up? How do you work out as a leader which are the ones you want to go for, and which are the ones aren't going to work for you? How do you do this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. You're dead right. We're looking at everything, and I think if it boils down to the comment I said before, you look at what makes us unique, first and foremost, but also what's going to get people on a plane, and thirdly, what's going to make the people living in the territory proud to be a part and get them out and offer them something that they would experience living in other metro city is probably the three key steps you kind of go through when you look at a process. You're right. We have a really rich Indigenous culture that we've managed to foster through the likes of Pachima in Alice Springs, which is an Indigenous light festival. And to put simply, we get artwork from the traditional owners in and around Alice Springs and put it up in lights. And an example of that is the McDonald Ranges, which is a 2.5 kilometre canvas, so to speak, that sees some amazing artwork being projected in the latest technologies that's used for the likes of Vivid and whatnot. I guess going to the other end of the spectrum, we are a fishing mad top end. It's the best place to fish in Australia if you want to try and catch a barra. I haven't caught one yet, but I'm trying to.
You've got to try and catch the $1 million one, I think, if you can catch one.
Well, I think because it sits under our banner now, it's a bit unfortunate that I can't catch it. But look, that's an event that we've partnered with BetEasy, and they're doing some amazing things in terms of developing that event, and that contributes alone about 10 million to the economy through petrol, boats, bait and tackle, and the whole work. So that's a project that'll be with us forevermore. And the $1 million tag hasn't gone off yet, Paul, but plenty of $10,000 tags have. And I think you look in the other end of the spectrum, we've got that period in the middle of the year when it is cold and wet in Melbourne and Sydney. So we decided to put on a pretty big national music festival that's going from strength to strength. So that's attracting Australia's best artists and artists from across the world to Darwin in what is traditionally a great time of the year, where we've kind of used that uniqueness once again to capture hopefully some travellers and do an event for the locals that is on the national festival calendar. So, mate, you're right, it's broad. We're always open for business is kind of what we say, and I think another part of that I can't underestimate is the local food and culinary scene in and around Darwin. There's quite a diverse population, and we have a variety of events and festivals through the dry season that caters for much more of a local contingent.
Tim, you mentioned before about BetEasy, and I want to talk about sponsorships for a moment. I mean, you are a government organisation, so the Northern Territory does fund you.
Yeah, correct. I think we are a government-owned company, I suppose, for want of a better word, but we're funded to a portion. So everything that we do is funded, absolutely, but it could be 50% or it could be 80%. So
how do they decide between 50 and 80%?
It depends on what we can generate through corporate revenue, I guess, is a good way to put it. So, as you mentioned, BetEasy is a good part of that, and we do the Darwin Supercars Roundup here. We need government funding to make sure that tickets are affordable and everyone has a chance to get along. But we also need to sell tickets and corporate hospitality and corporate sponsorship. So we're a funny little business in terms of how we operate. So I guess in part we're trying to become a self-sustaining business, for want of a better word, to rely less on government funding, I suppose, over the next 5 to 10 years as part of our strategic objectives, and generate more of a commercial environment for this company to survive and grow.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because you mentioned before the small population of the territory compared to especially the eastern states, and clearly the large majority of firms and organisations and businesses, large businesses, are based in either a Melbourne or a Sydney by and large. I mean, how do you attract them to invest in a sponsorship in something in the Northern Territory? What's the appeal for them?
Look, that's probably one of the most challenging questions I've had in the past 2 years. Our environment locally is currently pretty tough. We're kind of a boom and bust town from a Darwin perspective. Alice Springs is a little bit more resilient, but you're right, we don't have any major businesses that are I guess centrally set up in the Northern Territory. So our biggest asset is the fact that we can market to a national audience now. So if I look at it from a branding or an eyeballs perspective, we've got a fantastic opportunity to portray a brand either for a 6-month period through the $1 Million Fish, which we've spoken about, which is a great chance to make sure that brand is up in headlights for a longer period of time. Or we've got Darwin Supercars and Base in the Grass, which is incredibly targeted. So, it's a week or it's a couple of days that they've had a chance to activate, but it's usually in a time where it's a lower market in those eastern seaboards. So we're giving brands the opportunity to I guess activate and be in market when traditionally they wouldn't be.
If you look at it now and you say, okay, I'm going to invest in a program in the Northern Territory. Which ones can I do? I've got supercars. Yeah, but I can do supercars in a lot of states. I can do Bathurst or whatever I want to do. I could do a music festival. Yeah, but I can do music festivals in a lot of states. I can sponsor Queen if I wanted to. But the one to me is your First Nations. I mean, that's clearly your point of difference. I mean, how important is that out of all the things you offer? How important is that as a major event for you?
Yeah, it is. I think if we look at Parchama, a festival in light, I'd probably go on a limb and say that is our most prominent event. It's what is seeing the most growth year on year, and we're seeing the data that's coming out in particular from a Southeast Asian touring contingent. They want to experience what First Nations or Indigenous culture is, I guess, live, and Parchama is that point of difference which we mentioned. So what we do with that is they have a chance to see the artwork that they traditionally wouldn't see other than on a canvas live, and they get to have a chance to speak with the actual artists themselves from traditional country and hear their stories and how that artwork became to be what it is. If I was going out and saying that where's our growth and our where should this business target its investment going forward, you're dead right. Every city has a supercars. We're trying to be a little bit different in the way we deliver our supercars for Darwin, but our targeted investment should be aiming at Indigenous culture and what is truly unique to Australia, but more so Northern Territory.
Tim, just on that point then, if I'm a client and I'm in Sydney and I decide I might be interested in the supercars, am I going to choose the ones in Darwin over the one in Melbourne or Bathurst? Is it on price? Is price important for you, or is it really the unique situation that the territory offers?
Price is always important. We'll say first and foremost. We want to try and generate more commercial revenue or more corporate revenue because, in effect, Paul, that makes the event better. Our design isn't to pay dividend. As I mentioned before, we're a government-owned organisation, so all the money that we effectively generate or all the funding that we generate, we put back into the events to make it better. The point of difference is where Darwin Supercars sits. I can safely say that the supercars teams and drivers in particular, I think this is one of the best rounds on the circuit based on its climate, its attitude to supercars. If you sit in Darwin CBD throughout the week of supercars, mate, you get cut out. Put it that way. There's plenty going on, and it's a supercars overload. It really takes over the city, and I think that's an advantage that we have over your major ones, being Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, as an example, where when you literally land and step off the plane, you're in supercars mode for the better part of 10 days. So you kind of really feel it, and that's once again an advantage to us versus your bigger cities. So we would really try and sell it in that, and I'd say that again. It's the same for Base in the Grass, which is our large music festival. You'll feel it and see it beyond the gates of entry, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. And it's
okay. So the whole town embraces it.
Absolutely. So we are a small town. We're a regional town, from one a better way, but everyone gets behind it and everyone has fun. So when our events are on show, you know it. And the same for Alice Springs with Red Centre Nats, which is a sister event from the juggernaut of Summer Nats in Canberra, and Parchama. It's the same. You kind of step off the plane and you know you're in event mode and you know why you're there.
Tim, you talked about how you measure success in terms of room rate. How do you help the clients and sponsors that come on board? How do you help them measure success?
It's a challenging market. Well, I think Paul, you and I have spoken about this at length. It's a market that is ever changing. The days of, I guess, slapping a logo on a jersey or a supercar are slowly dying. So media exposure obviously is very important for some of the brands, but what we're trying to do is look a little bit differently and offer the clients a return on investment, or I guess one of a better word, return on objectives. So we go out pretty quickly and work out what the brand wants. And an example of that is we're currently in market for an energy provider, noting kind of the energy reserves and mining reserves that the Territory has. We would love to hear what the objectives are from the sponsor first and foremost. And what we're finding is it's not an exposure play. It's how do we A, put maybe money in the business's pocket, but B, how do we give back to the community and how do we intertwine ourselves with the community? And the current landscape in the Northern Territory is a challenging one for energy. So we're trying to play in that social area from a big brand perspective, and firstly listen, and secondly come back with options. And we're also in the banking space at the moment as well, where we are a small to medium sized business now. We carry a lot of revenue, and we need a banking partner that helps us as well as putting money in the bottom line of the bank. So we're looking at different ways of working with them, which is quite a refreshing way to do it. But I guess it's safe to say we would listen first and foremost on what the objectives are and try to provide a return.
Just as we close out, the obvious question at the moment is coronavirus. I guess that's whether it's a pandemic or a Spanish flu or whatever it is at the moment. Being close to Asia, is that a dramatic effect on the Northern Territory?
Look, it hasn't yet. I think we're in the same basket with the rest of Australia. It's very challenging on a tourism market. We're all reading and seeing about it. We are seeing some cancellations through tourism bookings at the moment, which is making our targets for our events that much harder. Fortunately, this year we've been quite resilient. So, to your question, mate, I don't think it is, from an events perspective, having an impact yet. But I think it's a watch and wait. We are very much in tune with our counterparts in the Department of Tourism to see what they're doing and how they're reacting. The proximity to Asia thing is a problem, yes, but I would suggest it's exactly the same problem that people within Australia aren't travelling as whereas they might have before. So we are in early stages. I think we'll, over the next month to 6 weeks, we'll really understand what it is meaning for our business and the broader tourism in the Northern Territory. But I'd also go out and say that the bushfires from the eastern seaboard that tragically ripped through a big chunk of the country at the turn of the year is also impacting on tourism more generally as well. So there's a few challenges here that we've got to try and navigate. We're hoping that we offer something that still gets people on planes and gets them up here, and also servicing the local community. But it is a problem, and we're hoping that it's resolved relatively quickly.
I'm talking to Tim Watsford, who's the General Manager of the Northern Territory Major Events Company. Tim, in closing, if I'm a potential sponsor listening right now, and you want to give me the pitch for the Northern Territory, just give me the one thing. Why now? Why now? Why Northern Territory?
In short, we are experiencing significant growth. We're up across our portfolio of events. We've spoken to Supercars, Basin of Grass, and Parchmer in particular. We're north of 25% growth rates year on year, and we're starting to challenge those bigger events on the eastern seaboard. My pitch to corporates now is getting it at base level, and come with us on a journey where we want partners for a longer term commitment, and we want to bring them in at where we are at the moment in terms of ground level. So there's plenty of opportunities for us to work with partners. There's a variety of assets, and I think the way that we're approaching events and corporate sponsorship in particular is a really different and innovative way. And we're happy to have a discussion with anyone around how we can help grow business. And that's probably what I'd say first and foremost around coming to do business in the Northern Territory.
Well, there, Tim, you get an interview and you get a free ad at the end, so that's not a bad story. Not a bad way to finish. Tim Watson, General Manager, Northern Territory Major Events Company. Thank you so much for your time today.
Good on you, Paul. Thank you.